Let me move us to our second topic. This week, Nebraska Republicans tried to change the way their electoral votes are distributed. And so that's renewed discussion of whether the Electoral College is the best way to elect a president. Over recent years, New York and 17 other states have voted to support the National Popular Vote Plan. And this means they pledge to give all their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the popular vote nationwide, regardless of who won their state. But this compact can only go into effect if more states agree. Luke, I'm really interested in what you think about this plan.
Well, the Electoral College is not the best way to elect a president. I think most Americans realize that. The challenge is to do away with the Electoral College. The easiest, or not the easiest, but the most direct way to do that is to amend the Constitution, which, as Lisa knows, is very difficult to do. So this leads to other efforts like this National Popular Vote Compact, where states are trying to take matters into their own hands, so to speak, and say, okay, if we can rally together enough states that total 270 Electoral College votes to all agree that they will cast all their Electoral College votes for the person who wins the popular vote, then the popular vote will essentially determine who becomes president. So do I think this is a good idea? I think it's better than what we have. I'm not sure we're going to get enough states to sign on. Interestingly, in New York, Senator Joe Griffo from the Mohawk Valley is one of the big proponents of this. I mean, he was talking to me about it 10 years ago and was super excited. Why? Because if you live in New York and you're a Republican, you feel like your vote doesn't matter. So it does have some bipartisan appeal, which a constitutional amendment wouldn't. But then I do worry it's a compact. States join. What if states leave? Then you dip below 270. That uncertainty makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, for sure. It is interesting. The bipartisan aspect of this is kind of interesting, and I could see support changing depending on which direction presidential elections or which party they tend to be favoring over time, right? And you could imagine a state pulling out at the last minute, right?
Well, yeah, so in theory it sounds good to New York, but are state legislators really going to be comfortable if a Republican wins the popular vote, casting all New York's votes to a Republican? That's where I think you're going to have buyer's remorse if this actually takes shape.
Yeah, it sounds like 1877 to me. You know, the problem with this is Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3, that talks about ultimately 34 states of having to come together with a state legislator to say that they want a convention, and then 38 states of those going and saying that they want to ratify the Constitution. I don't understand how they're saying that they only need these few amount of states, other than it adds up to the 270 electoral votes.
Right, so they're not amending the Constitution. You're absolutely correct about that. The idea is that states do have the power to allocate their electoral votes how they choose. And that's where it comes in. So each state is passing their own laws that if they get enough states, that it will trigger that they'll cast all their electoral votes to the person who wins the popular vote.
Isn't that how it usually works, though?
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, the constitutional problem, though, is that it's a compact. It's not that if each state was acting on its own, that would be different, but it's because it's pursuant to a compact. And the compact clause of Article 1 says that the consent of Congress is required for interstate compacts. And the Supreme Court has said that's certainly true when an interstate commerce would impact the vertical balance of power between the federal government and the state governments, or the horizontal power among the states. And so the first argument, and look, there's this constitutionality here. If this were actually litigated, it would be like the case of the century.
Yeah, you're excited.
Yes, there are so many, and they're murky because this doesn't get litigated that much, right? But under the compact clause, the vertical balance of power, the argument goes, would be impacted because states' power would increase at the cost of the power of the federal government, namely that this would eliminate the possibility of contingent elections in the House. That's the argument. The counter-argument is that Congress's consent would not be required in this case because Congress has no power to regulate the method or the mode by which states allocate their electors. The counter-argument to that is that no, Congress's power under the compact clause is plenary. And so
what does that mean?
It means it's absolute, that they would always have to approve a compact. The second the horizontal balance of power argument is interesting, right? Because the argument is that the balance of power between the states with respect to electing the president would be altered, which of course is the point of the compact, right? To increase the power of some states, diminish the power of other states. The contrary argument is that the non-compacting states would still have their power, the power they have now, to allocate their electors. They're not losing anything. That's just a part of the argument under the compact clause. There are arguments under the presidential electors clause. There are even arguments, not as interesting or as powerful, as compelling, under the Equal Protection Clause / Voting Rights Act. So
who knows what would happen?
who knows what would happen?
Do you have any thoughts with this court where it
Well,
might come down?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine this court upholding it, right?
Really?
Even though, and of course, this would be one of those situations where the courts would be inconsistent, right? The conservatives who talk a lot about states' rights,
Right, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, you'd think that
federalism, but there are numerous. My students and I talk about this all the time. We're constantly talking about how, the court these people on the court are not always consistent in this regard. Federalism is what they scream about until they don't. Anyway, I think interstate compacts generally are fascinating, and some of them aren't that interesting, right? It's about allocating water rights between two states or something like that, but this kind of thing would be.
Interesting.
Luke, what about what Nebraska and Maine have of where the electoral votes go by congressional district? Would that be a better plan than winner take all?
I think it's better than what we have now. I think the best way to actually do this would to have a compact or something that's not as legally fraught, where states allocate their electoral votes proportionally. That's the issue. That's where you get these funky situations in 2016 and 2000. And if it was in New York, if it was 60-40, that's the vote share, and then the electoral votes are split 60-40. I think it would solve a lot of problems, but states aren't incentivized to break up their votes.
Well, speaking of incentives, I've been hearing from several people, well, it doesn't matter where we vote in New York, because there's only 7 states, people in 7 states are going to decide this election. So if we change the Electoral College in some way, would that be an incentive for people to vote or take elections more seriously?
Think their vote would matter more. Yes, swing states matter. I always tell New Yorkers, though, we have among the most Electoral College votes. So you might not feel like your vote matters, but we have a disproportionate influence on the outcome of the presidential election.
And not only that, the popular vote, even if it doesn't matter legally, it's mattering more psychologically, I think, right? I mean, that's a compelling story that can be told when the popular vote is won by one candidate and the Electoral College vote is won by another. That in the psyche it matters.
And this year particular, isn't it important that people vote for the congressional election? Because whoever the president is, he or she cannot do much unless he or she has Congress with him or her, right?
Right. I mean, the last several years, presidential elections have been historically close, and government's been divided. So it's really hard to get things done because of those two circumstances.
Any last thoughts, Ben?
No, I mean, I agree. I don't see us all of a sudden starting to legislate like we used to and get off of Twitter and everything else that is currently the divisive component in politics right now.